Hey, this is Matt once again. Welcome back to another video. This is another paid request, this time for Andrew Patterson. Thank you so much for that. And for those interested in requesting pretty much any type of videos, topics, reactions, reviews, re-reviews, randomness, out of blueness, whatever it may be, feel free to send it either directly to my PayPal or join my Patreon. Both links are down below in the info box. And he wanted me to talk a bit about Back to the Future Part 2. And what's funny about that is, growing up, I did watch the Back to the Future films. The third one I watched the least, because I don't hate it like I used to, but it's my least favorite of the three. It's a nice way to end the trilogy, with like the way it ends and wrapping up some story points, but just I'm not a big Western guy, so I just found the first two either. The first one I think is the funniest of the three. The second one I think is the most imaginative and creative of the three. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I thought the third one was kind of a letdown, where I don't think it's as funny as part one, I don't think it's as creative as part two. And as a kid, if you were to ask me when I was 12, 13, I would say Back to the Future Part 2 is my favorite of the three. Nowadays I say the first one, because the first one, again, has a bit of a more funny, entertaining stuff with Crispin Glover's character and the weird having to deal with your mom, where she has hots for you. The Christopher Lloyd who doesn't understand Marty and doesn't believe in him, and Ronald Reagan. Who else is it? Jerry Lewis. But Back to the Future Part 2, I love how creative and inventive they got for the sequel. When the first Back to the Future film came out, there was no thoughts of a sequel. They ended it that way because they thought it'd be a fun way to end it. And even Robert Zemeckis said, if we knew we were making a sequel, I think Bob Gale, the producer, said this too, we would not have involved the girlfriend. Because think about it, the girlfriend, it became kind of a problem with shit. We ended with the girlfriend coming with, so now we gotta pretty much knock her out, then dump her, and then she meets, they weren't planning on the sequel. But then Back to the Future became one of the biggest hits of the year. Surprise box office smash. And so Robert Zemeckis, who years before was a guy that was incognito, was making box office flops like Used Cars. Then he has Romancing the Stone become a hit. Then he has Back to the Future become a mega hit. And now he has carte blanche to do whatever he wants. And so the next project that takes a little while is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And then that became a huge hit. And then, hey, Back to the Future 2. In fact, the script is so big, we gotta split into two parts, and we'll just make it a trilogy. So, Back to the Future Part 2, take a break. Then while people are building the Western town and all this other stuff, we're going to finish up the post-production of Back to the Future 2. So one comes out 89, the summer, and then one comes out 1990. And 1989 was a huge summer for movies. Like, you look back at 89, you wish you could have a summer like that nowadays. Like, think about the summer of movies now. I mean, what do we got? What? Jurassic Park Dominion. Okay, Top Gun Maverick. Think about 89, though. You had Batman, Lethal Weapon 2, Ghostbusters 2, Back to the Future Part 2, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, the James Bond film License to Kill, and more. I mean, you had an insane summer. And, so films had to try to deal with these mega hits coming one after the other, and some don't get as much box office because you have these three other mega hits taking the business away from them. And again, the inventiveness of the sequel where, okay, we're going to go to the future, but then we also have an alternate timeline, but then we can also go back to the first movie. It makes it much more unique as a sequel. And it definitely utilizes the time travel aspect immensely well because of that. Now, a lot of the cast returns. You have Michael J. Fox. It's so sad what happened with him, his affliction, because, number one, he seems like a nice enough guy. Him and no one, not just him, no one deserves that. And the Parkinson's and he's such a wonderful talent. He could do drama and Casualties of War. He did work in horror comedy like The Frighteners, which Robert Zemeckis produced and was directed by Peter Jackson. He worked well on the TV show Spin City. In fact, that's a show I need to find a DVD of, at least the first season or so. I like to rewatch Spin City. It's been a long time since I've seen that show. But, I mean, this is a guy that wasn't even going to be in the first movie. It was going to be Eric Stoltz. And I'm surprised they have not released all the Eric Stoltz footage. And you know someone would take the movie and just re-edit the film, even a fan cut, the Eric Stoltz version. I'm still surprised they have not done that just to sell more 4Ks now, or whatever the hell it would be. 4K? Ultra duper 4K this time. It's 8K now, but this time we have the Eric Stoltz cut. Or as much as we could put in there. Because they filmed a lot of it, and then they're like, this ain't working. Then they got Michael J. Fox. Which was, he brought that innocence, he brought that likability, and it's just easy to root for type of a feel performers look to his characters. Just easy to like. Charm. Just a charming guy. But again, that boyish, weird, like, innocence type of thing to his performances as well. And then he works so wonderfully with Christopher Lloyd as Dot Brown. Claudia Wells, who's the girlfriend, she could not come back because of personal issues. I believe someone she knew, I want to say it was cancer, or I forget the details. But she had to drop out, so they bring in Elisabeth Shue, who would be in Adventures of Babysitting, and Hollow Man, and quite a few other movies. I don't know why. Sometimes I get her and Leah Thompson confused. I don't know why. And then they're both in the same movie. But Thomas F. Wilson as Biff, and the various versions of Biff. There was the older version with the makeup. There's the younger version from 1955. There's the, if not son, the grandson. Was a son or grandson in the future? Just a shitload. Probably their grandson. Yeah, because he said, Gramps. It just, with how it was at this day and time of effects, the way they were doing the split screens, and not just split screens, that's the wrong term to use, but how they're able to have multiple people and multiple versions of people in the same frame and be able to move the camera back and forward without cutting and pull back to reveal both, like Thomas F. Wilson's talk to each other. Industrial Light and Magic put in a lot of work in this movie. And while you see a bit of an off shot once in a while, it's still very entertaining. I love the idea, since the first movie's ending, of having a DeLorean that flies. And anytime I think of DeLorean, I think of it flying. And that's mainly because of this film. Because, in a weird way, this was the one I watched more as a kid. I think it was because of the future aspect, and this is much more of an adventure. Like, the first one was a human comedy drama with his time travel aesthetic around it. This is much more of a sci-fi adventure film. And as a kid, that's what I was more into, and I still really enjoy it because of that. And just what you're able to do in this running time. It was ambitious, and I'm sure quite expensive. And with Alan Silvestri coming back to do the musical score, this is after doing films like Predator. And of course, he did the first movie. Once again, knocked out of the park with the score that is rousing and exciting. Lea Thompson comes back as the mom, and some of the people that work with Thomas F. Wilson, at least the Biff and Altered in 1985, Billy Zane is one of them, and I think Casey Shamasco from Young Guns. When Marty McFly's in the future, and he has the video game, that's a baby's toy. You play it with your hands. One of the kids is Elijah Wood, a very, very young Elijah Wood. Before Lord of the Rings, The Good Son, all this other stuff. And just, the hoverboard, and it's, like I said, as an adult, my favorite is the first one. But when I see or I think of Back to the Future, this is the movie that pops up. Even the poster with Marty and Doc Brown within that pose. That's why I think of Back to the Future. That poster, that he did the hoverboard, the 2015 future, the Nike shoes that lace themselves. I love it. And it's a cool bit of there's a lot of times where a sequel, well, it's 2 years later, it's 3 years later, it's 5 years later. But in a way, it was a weird bit of serendipity that they kind of accidentally fell in on, of having the movie end that way, so they had to do it right after the first one. They couldn't just go, oh, that didn't happen, that ending didn't happen, or we cut away, and then boom, 5 years later, you're like, what the hell? It'd be a cop-out, people would be pissed. And again, they didn't plan on doing a sequel, otherwise, as they say, they wouldn't have had the girlfriend in there. They would just left her behind and be Marty and Doc and move on with the story. But it made this link of a trilogy that many people will call the best trilogy ever made. Because of how it links up with each other and how it connects with each other. And also because there's not going to be a Back to the Future 4 or a remake as long as Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale are alive, because they've said, we have it in our contract, like we were able to sign that no one can make a sequel or a remake as long as we're alive. And I'm glad for that, because not every damn movie needs a legacy sequel or remake or whatever the hell. I love the 2015 future stuff. It's weird saying that because now it's 2022. And now 2015 is the past. But even the makers of the film said, no matter what, we're not going to get the future right. No one can get the future completely right. So let's just have fun with it. It's 1989. The future, 2015, seemed like pretty far away at that point. Really far away. So let's just have fun. And there's some stuff that they were able to think of for that future 2015 stuff. Like the older Marty McFly has a TV. Flat screen. Because back to the day, people don't realize the TVs we had a big old fat ass on the back of them. So the fact they had a slim, flat TV seemed sci-fi. And then it mounted on the wall. And to do conference calls like people would do with Zoom and Skype and all that stuff. And having multiple channels on a TV. Or to do stuff and just say with your voice. Like people had with Siri and all that other stuff. That's kind of what they were having in this. Also having places that are just retro of the 80s. Like the Cafe 80s. I guarantee you somewhere there's a Cafe 80s type. And they're always talking about, 80s, nostalgia. But yeah, you'd have a future, there'd be stores that just flat out antique, nostalgia. And then there'd be places stripped about oh yeah, this is kind of like in Pulp Fiction where they went into that place and it's about the 1950s and this Buddy Holly and there are places that are like the 80s as well, or a bit of throwback to the 80s. It was cool. You'll see in the flying cars, which of course we didn't get that, and the hoverboard, and do I really need to explain the plot of Back to the Future Part 2? If you don't know the plot, see the film. Get some help. Don't do drugs. See the film. See the first film. Hell, you didn't even see the third film. And then come back to the video. Trust me, I don't think you're going to regret it. So you have the hoverboard, the Cubs winning the World Series, which is funny because I think not in 2015, but like 2016 or so, they did win the World Series. So it wasn't exactly, but it was pretty close. The Jaws 19 with the hologram. Sure still looks fake. I did the Nike self-lacing shoes, which I know they made those shoes, but it doesn't, of course, self-lace. And I love the hoverboard stuff. The hoverboard stuff was cool. It's one of those things that, they have attempted in real life to try to do some stuff that's kind of like a hoverboard. And I forget which documentary it was. I think it was a documentary made a few years ago about Back to the Future stuff. There's like people try to do hoverboard, get a little bit of success. But yeah, not going to be anytime soon we don't have real hoverboards. But that was, ever since I played Ninja Turtles in Time, where the turtles are in the future and on pretty much hoverboards. That's where it's fucking hoverboards. I don't know how else you would describe it. When they're in the future, which the level is just fucking F-Zero, they're on hoverboards. I love the hoverboard concept. It's kind of a note of the skateboard in the first movie, but just much more of a cooler visual aesthetic. One thing leads to another. The older Biff finds the DeLorean. Marty McFly had an almanac because he wanted to make some money going back in time, predict all the winnings, make bets. Doc Brown says, nah, I did not make the time machine for this. Biff heard all this, stole it, came back, and when they come back, it's in an alternate 1985. I thought that was a risky venture, to have an alternate 1985, to have a bit of a darker world, darker future where Hill Valley is a war zone, demilitarized. Biff is this big fat cat casino called the Pleasure Paradise. He was the luckiest man on earth, and he married Marty's mom, and he had his dad killed. It was great to see that alternate version play out. And because you saw the first movie, and because you know how Hill Valley was, and to see how things had changed, in a way it was kind of easier for people to understand the whole alternate theory of how you change something in the past, and you... I'm a sucker for that alternate version type of stuff. Alternate, how you can take something you've seen for a long time and make something skewed differently. We always think of, not always, but sometimes I think of, you step into alter reality, and even as something as simple as, well, what movies were made that weren't made in this world, but what movies, different type of movies that got made, different, the what ifs. What if the what ifs in that world got made, and what if Bruce Lee and Brandon Lee had not died, and what if Chris Farley had not died? What if something else had happened? The what ifs is a very intriguing aspect, and this what if 1985 made it feel different. It didn't feel like a copy of the first movie. Because a lot of sequels, even some I do quite enjoy, to fall into that easy trap. But like, no, we're going to make a sequel. We're going to make it different. Like I said, very ambitious. And speaking of, Marty's dad getting killed off, Crispin Glover, he does not return. There's, depending on who you speak to, if you speak to Crispin Glover, he will say that Bob Gale in particular is the villain. If you talk to people like Bob Gale, he'll say that Crispin Glover was just hard to handle. The story Crispin Glover says is that he was offered a portion of what the other actors were getting. Now, if he was offered less than Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd, I can understand. Because I can perfectly understand because you're not the star of it. I mean, if Crispin Glover was in this, I don't know how that would work into the plot, because one of the things about the Ultra 85 that works well is the fact that the dad has been killed off. It makes much more of a grimmer, serious notion of, we have to fix this. We have to get this fixed. Not just because of the whole town, but even more of a personal thing, and the death of a family member. So even if Crispin Glover had returned, would they have dropped that? And if so, what else would they have done with it? Maybe they would have said what Crispin Glover would have been a drunk, or would have been destitute, or I just don't know if that would have been as effective. And then also Crispin Glover sued and won because they cast someone else and kind of try to make him look like Crispin Glover. But I think that's also why they made that character upside down in the future, where the dad is like upside down, and to try to hide the audience that it's not quite Crispin Glover. I know Crispin Glover said, oh, that guy was awful, he was terrible, but he was barely enough in the movie to really get much of an impression. I think he was like maybe 2 scenes and you could barely even grasp a performance, good or bad. So I think Crispin Glover just took it personally. But he's like, hey, you can't make people, just you'll make people think that's me. If people even told me, oh, I liked you in that when that wasn't me. It's something about the likeness rights of certain actors. He was able to sue and he won. And then things had to change a little bit about using the likeness of people. I know in an interview, Crispin Glover said like he's cool with Robert Zemeckis, but he definitely hates Bob Gale, the producer's guts. And that's why you never see Crispin Glover in interviews, like documentaries of Back to the Future. You probably never will because of that situation. And so then, while the movie's not as funny as the first one, because you had that, except maybe some of the bits in the future. I did with the video game he shoots, and the little kid's like, you mean you use your hands? That's a baby's toy. Baby's toy. Or the Cafe 80s with was it Ronald Reagan and Michael Jackson, which I wish Michael Jackson was around and just doing this stuff in 2015. Just all he had to worry about was doing the Cafe 80s instead of being lied about and bullshit said about him. But that's life. And another interesting aspect is when they have to go to the 1955. And you get to see the first movie from a different point of view. That's taking the time travel concept and run with it. Again, the time travel, you have so many aspects of that you could do. Okay, run with it then. Again, that's why I mean the sequel was just very ambitious. I appreciate that. We see the fun. We see the fun aspect of the future. We see the darker aspect of this Ultra 85, and then we have the creative aspect, the intriguing aspect, I should say. The future's creative and fun. The Ultra 85 was serious and you could say more story driven. because of the idea. This is why things need to be fixed. This is when things are in an extra gear of seriousness. And then treating the aspect as, let's look at the first film from a different perspective. So one Marty McFly is seeing the Marty McFly from the first movie, and that part's from the first movie, but we're seeing it from this other Marty McFly's perspective. And the way, again, the actors, older, younger versions of them interacting, they did a really good job. And my neighbor's rooster apparently approves of it because he won't shut up about it. Talk about deja vu. And it's, again, it still has, that's what I mean, it feels like an adventure aspect. Like you get your money's worth. The future, the alternate, the past. The chase where he's got the hoverboard and the younger Biff is trying to get him. And Doc is able to help Marty get out of there while Biff crashes his car again. And the ending ends on a fun cliffhanger. Spoiler alert. Where it gets struck by lightning, the DeLorean, and then Marty turns, there's a guy there. Doc Brown is in the past. He finds the other Doc Brown and he freaks out. I just see you back to the future. I know, Doc. But I'm back from the future. Great Scott. And he just passes out. And now that I think about this, this was just one I saw first. And I don't sound weird. I think this is the one I watched quite a few times before I ever saw the first movie. So I would see like him looking at parts of the first movie, and I could get that's what it was, but I didn't know the context of those scenes. And I don't know why that was. A lot of times I did that where I would see the sequel and I would just see the sequel again and again and again, and then it was forever until I saw like the first movie or something. I don't know. That happened with Hellbound. I think that happened with maybe Hellraiser 2. I remember only seeing like the last 5 minutes of Hellraiser 1 and then seeing Hellraiser 2, and then it was finally also like Halloween 2. Like I saw Halloween 2 again, and then I finally saw Halloween 1. So yeah, I did that a lot where I would see the sequel multiple times and then finally see the first one. But yeah, I love Back to the Future Part 2. I think it's definitely a great sequel. And even now, I'm still, even though I said the first one was my favorite, I'm still debating, like, do I like the second one more? Just like, again, the first one's more fun. The first one's more funny, like I said. The second one, I love that adventure creative aspect. I think what it is Back to the Future Part 2, it just has that theme where it's the middle. So there's an opening, but it's kind of in the middle of action, and there's an ending, but it's a cliffhanger ending. So it has one of those where it has a beginning, but it's not a full beginning. It has an ending, but it's not a full ending. So it's kind of one of those weird things where you can watch it by itself, but there's always like an addendum. You can watch it by yourself, but it's like, okay, how did they get to that aspect at the beginning? You watch it by itself, but you have to get to how they finish it off, the ending. So it has that kind of weird factor of that nature, but I still love Back to the Future Part 2. Definitely think it's a worthy sequel. Some critics dumped on it. I have no idea why. I think it's all the stuff I just said for the past 30 minutes. The cast works well. Again, the future aspect's still fun to watch to this day. Hoverboard kicks ass. Oh, even some in the future, like Jason Scott Lee, who's a dreaded Bruce Lee story. He's one of the bullies in the future aspect. They don't want the water unless you got power. And yeah, credit to some of these people, like Thomas F. Wilson, the way he plays that future and the way he plays the older Biff, like, And then even the Ultra 85 Biff, they're the same, but they're both different. Like the Biff from 1955, he's a villain, but he's more cocky. The one in the future is definitely more over the top, goofy. The one in Ultra 85 is definitely more deadly. The older that's in the future, he's a bit more conniving, but a bit more tired. A lot of aspects for people to play off. But yeah, love Back to the Future Part 2. So with that said, thanks for watching. Take care. We'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.